Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues in council. I call to order the public work session for today, August the 9th. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes?
Present.
Mr. Battle?
Here.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Dr. Whitaker?
Present.
Mr. Woodard? Mayor Glover?
Here. Thank you, ma'am. City Manager Chapman. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Mayor Glover, Vice Mayor Barnes, members of Portsmouth City Council, Portsmouth friends and family, good evening. We will have 4 presentations for you this evening. The first presentation will be by Ms. Vernetta Mitchell, and Ms. Mitchell is a director with MGT Consulting Group, which is an organization overseeing the disparity study for the city. She will be presenting virtually due to travel constraints. Ms. Mitchell will be providing the status update as well as information relative to the study. Ms. Mitchell, welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, even though I would have preferred to be in Portsmouth. But I don't think you would appreciate me being there just getting over COVID. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present. What I will do today is present to you where we are in terms of the study, a little background for a few of you who may not be as familiar with the task of the study and the objectives. And then, of course, if you have any questions, you can either interrupt me during the presentation or hold them till the end. I'm going to share my screen. And please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
We're good.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And is my audio okay?
It is.
Very good, thank you. Just very briefly about MGT, we are a public sector consulting firm, 48 years in business, over 13,000 engagements, working with public sector clients across the country in all aspects of government operations and analyses. And so we are pleased to be conducting this study again for Portsmouth. Just a brief overview of the study. The study intends to identify whether or not there is significant statistical disparity between minority and women firms that are identified and located available in your marketplace, which we have not defined as of yet, and also the utilization of those firms in not only city contracts, but subcontracts on city projects as well. We'll also talk with many firms in the marketplace to identify whether or not there are barriers that are preventing the firms from being successful in either winning contracts directly with the city or as subcontractors on city projects. And then we'll also look at some contracts, which we have done. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Looking at bid proposals, is there language in the solicitation documents that could potentially be barriers for firms doing business in the marketplace. Just very briefly, as we mentioned earlier, MGT was selected to also complete and conduct your 2015 procurement study. It was the city's first study, and as I often say to clients who are conducting studies for the first time, there's a lot to learn that first time, and that was definitely the case here as well. But the city did a wonderful job in getting us all the information that we needed. We completed the study. Some of the limitations from the last study, and this is very common with first studies, is there was very limited subcontracting data. Subcontracting data not only of MWBE firms, but non-MWBE firms as well, is important because it illustrates the full picture of utilization in the marketplace. So in our current methodology, the last study did not have subcontractor data in it. It just was not available. Over the years since the last study, we have increased or improved our methodology. So our current methodology of collecting that subcontractor data is to do what we call a prime survey. We go to all of the firms that have received contracts from the city and ask them to submit that information to us so that we can have that full picture. And so the second study limitation was availability. The methodology that is currently used in the marketplace is a custom census availability approach, which we utilize Dun & Bradstreet of firms in the relevant marketplace that provide the goods and services that you buy. And that's always the most important part of availability. It has to be firms that provide the services that the city secures to be determined available to do business with the city. The last study from 2015 did identify some disparities in procurement. African-American-owned firms in construction, goods, and supplies, there was underutilization and disparity there. And non-minority women in professional services, goods, and supplies as well. Okay. So what's a little different from this study? If you were with us the last study, you'll notice that the methodology has advanced since 2015. The availability is one of those advancements in our methodology. Of course, looking at one of the things that we do, or what we are presently doing with the city's current data, is looking at the procurement description of what did you buy and assigning an NAICS code to that. There are several benefits to that. At the end of the day, you will receive all of the data that we have cleaned and updated and prepared for the analysis, so you can use that for future analysis of your own. But the good part about that is it specifically will identify how much can I spend in this particular procurement type. So for example, if you have insurance services, the way that we calculate utilization and conduct our availability will tell you exactly by that NAICS code of insurance services how much the city spent in that 5-year period. So again, that will give you a good idea when you're outreaching to new firms where you spend a lot of money and where you have very low availability to actually do outreach and economic development with firms that provide that service to hopefully encourage them to bid on city contracts. The utilization I talked about in the collection of the subcontract data, that utilization will now give you an analysis of how much money was spent with minority and women-owned firms to include subcontractors, which is a little different from the 2015 study. And then, of course, the anecdotal, we have advanced our methodology in the collection of data. This study, we provided the cities with a Disparity Study website. That website provides firms in the community to actually go and learn more about the study, but also they can submit comments about their experiences doing business or attempting to do business on city contracts. Those comments come back directly to MGT, and we incorporate that those comments in our qualitative analysis. Speaking of community engagement and our qualitative or anecdotal data collection, for the city, we are proposing 2 community engagement meetings. One of the 2 community engagement meetings are scheduled for tomorrow morning, 10 to 12, via Zoom. Then we will also conduct 50 one-on-one interviews with randomly selected businesses in your marketplace. We'll also speak with trade associations and business organizations within the area. Trade associations and business organizations, that's what they do, support businesses in the market. So it is very insightful to hear from them about the economic environment of firms in the marketplace. What are some of the barriers that firms are having in terms of scaling up their businesses, or if they're having any specific barriers to doing business with the city. I mentioned the website, and then also we've established a 24/7 voicemail line. So we understand that the businesses are busy all day. They work different hours where they have time to do qualitative, answering a lot of surveys and things of that nature is sometimes difficult. So we do have a 24/7 voicemail line set up. When a business finds out about the study, wants to provide information, they can either leave their comments on the voicemail, we call them back and follow up at a time that's convenient for them, or they can just let us know that they want us to talk with them, and then we'll call them and set up a time for that. We'll also conduct a survey, a large qualitative survey with several hundred vendors in the marketplace to collect that data. The main thing about the qualitative data collection, the anecdotal data collection, is that we absolutely need to take a deeper dive as to whether discrimination occurs in not only the public sector with the city of Portsmouth, but the private sector marketplace as well. So all of our qualitative data that we collect will all be centered around whether or not there are barriers in the marketplace that are based on discriminatory behavior in the marketplace, and how do we address those. So what have we done since we started? March 22, we had a project initiation meeting. Patty Phillips, Gloria Taylor and team sat with us. We walked through the scope of work, got a clear understanding of what that was, asked questions about who were some of the staff members that we needed to interview and talk with, talked a lot about data. We can't talk enough about data. That is the foundation of the study, so we spent a considerable amount of time talking about the data. The first of 2 business engagement meetings are scheduled for tomorrow, August 10th, from 10 to 12, and it is a Zoom meeting. The communication and outreach plan, we have established that plan. It lays out a framework in which we'll communicate with the community through email blasts, through press releases, who do we need to contact in the community and what's the message, so that everyone can become aware of the study, and more importantly, how businesses can engage in the study. And we invite all businesses, minority, women, non-minority, non-women-owned firms to participate in the study. I mentioned that we launched the website. You'll find the website link there. And we also have an email that is established. Again, that email comes directly to MGT. It is not shared with the city, so that firms, if they can't do an interview, they can't do the survey, there is still an opportunity for firms to provide their comments, their feedback of their experiences doing business with the city. So I think and the 24/7 voicemail number is there as well. So again, the advanced methodology that we have that's a little different from our last study is that there's every way that we can imagine that firms have an opportunity to compete, have an opportunity to express their experiences in competing in the city's marketplace for contracts. The draft legal chapter, which is just a summary of case law that guides our methodology, guides how programs are designed and developed. That is currently under review. We submitted that to the city for review. The procurement and program policy interviews, we've completed those. We've met with individuals in economic development. We've met with public work. We've met with procurement and other staff members, just to understand how the policies are operationalized, how they actually may impact firms in the marketplace who's doing business, and that just helps us to get a better understanding of the current policies and procedures, but also it helps us to understand what are some of the key questions that we need to ask the business community about their experience in trying to do business with the city or doing business with the city. We have collected the data. Definitely one of the pluses of going through a study is that the staff immediately knew what data we needed after our first conversation. It did not hesitate to get that to us. So I will commend you. I think this is the fastest we've ever received data in conducting a study. So we are going through the process of what we're calling updating that data to be analysis ready. That's assigning the NAICS codes, that's identifying the location of firms by county and state, which will help us to determine the relevant market areas for the study. And then we're also looking at some of those transactions that may not be included in that final analysis. And that could be items such as you pay your tax bill, you pay the building water bill. Those are not competitive transactions, so we exclude those dollars from the analysis. And so all of this information is completely transparent to the city. When we turn this data back over to you, you'll be able to see what we've excluded in the analysis. You'll be able to see all of the NAICS codes. You'll be able to identify those firms that we've been able to identify as minority and women-owned firms. And all of that, again, once we're complete with the studies, will be turned over to the city for your use. So over the next couple of months, we have a lot of great things that are happening. The draft policy chapter of our review of your policies, procedures, ordinance, and our interviews will be completed this month and submitted to the city for review and comment. We'll conduct interviews with the area trade association and business organizations. We'll begin that task this month as well. The prime utilization of data update, where we complete all of the updates of the NAICS codes and marking for exclusion, will be completed right around the end of August, 1st of September. So I put a September date just to be on the safe side. The next step is to go to the communities that have received contracts by the city and request all of the subcontractor data of subs that work from their contracts with the city. The geographic market area, this is where we're trying to identify where firms are located, where 75% of your dollars were spent with those firms. And so that determines your program market area, geographic market area for the study. The utilization and product market analysis, October timeframe. And then we've also added to our study, to this contract as a value add, an economic impact analysis of your MWBE utilization. Pardon me. The economic impact analysis is a new offering that MCT is providing to clients. So really, the disparity study looks at where you have over underutilization or disparity. The economic impact analysis really speaks to how many jobs were created, what's the tax revenue back to the city, looked at wages in the community, et cetera. And really, how effective and how is your MWBE program really impacting the economy of the city and what the program can actually produce as a return on investment if there is further investment in the program in that area. So we will have that analysis ready in November of this year. And then the availability analysis, which is the custom census approach that I talked about earlier, in December. So the second half of 2022, we have a lot of great analyses that we'll be able to conduct, present to the city, have conversations about, and once approved, we move forward to the next task and begin drafting components of the report. And that is the presentation for today, and I'll be happy to address any questions that someone may have.
Did he raise his hand? Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Just want to get some clarity as far as the subcontractor data. Are you getting that from the city database, or are you going through the primes to get that?
We're going directly to the primes to get that.
Under the previous study, was that something that was supposed to have been monitored through the city as far as its the subcontractors that are used?
It should be something that the city is tracking in terms of subcontractor participation, particularly if there are goals on your project. It's really important to understand as a city, as an organization, where are the dollars really going in on our contract. And so it was one of the recommendations that we made from the 2015 study to collect the subcontractor data. I'm almost certain that that did not occur, so that's why we are going directly to the primes to get that data.
Okay.
And that is the presentation for today, and I'll be happy to address any questions that someone may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Quite welcome.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How you doing, Dr. Mitchell? I have a question about the first business engagement meeting. Just want to know, or can you reiterate who's the participants and how was that arranged?
Great question. So the business engagement meeting is open to the public. Our advertising platform that we used was email blast to all of your present vendors. We also sent it to all of the trade associations and business organizations that we have identified in the marketplace. And the city team has been extremely helpful in helping us identify some additional stakeholders or trade associations in the market. And then we've asked them to share with their membership. And so that is how the business engagement meeting is advertised, and it is open to the public. The format to the meeting, there will be a very brief presentation of what the study is, what we hope to achieve in terms of objectives. Is there disparity? Is there not disparity? And then provide firms the opportunity to tell us what their experience has been, good or bad. It can be either way. And that's where we capture that information from those firms on their experience doing business with the city, with primes that are contracted with the city or in the private sector marketplace.
And one more for the city manager. Is this something that we'll be sharing, this link right here?
Yes, there's a website, but we'll share the link.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for the presentation and your work done on this packet. Looking back at 2015, where you found the study results, the disparities that were identified for the African Americans in construction and goods, and then the non-minority women. I know going through this process, we don't want the same kind of finding to come up and it not be addressed. So the outcome of what you find, how do we hold our city or us accountable to make sure that these issues are being addressed?
That's a loaded question.
Well,
So I will present it this way. Because we provide the recommendations, we provide selected practices of what other agencies, peer agencies your size, do and how they achieve the objectives that they have for their program. So I'll speak to that experience versus, trying to exactly say how to fix it. But the experience has been, my experience, and I've been conducting studies for over 15 years, but I've been doing minority business development for 25. My experience has been that you really have to invest in someone that is going to take the lead or take the charge in making the program a reality. And that comes with having a team of people who can internally work with procurement, with departments who may have procurement authority, and also working with the community and helping them to understand how do they scale up their businesses if necessary to come and do business. Where are the opportunities? How do they find out about the opportunities? And so the best successful program is one that is invested in terms of resources of people to actually carry forth the council's objectives.
okay, good job.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to respond to council. We have a meeting or interview set up next week for Minority Business Coordinator to take on this role.
Okay.
And we're also looking at revamping our current policies and procedures.
I think that's what yes. So great. Thank you.
And excuse me, Ms. Mitchell, this is Mayor Glover. One of the things that I've seen in my experience in the marketplace in terms of minority firms, of which I am with my own business, sometimes the barriers can be people have to have the right information, certifications, and things like that in order to be competitive for those opportunities. So I'm really looking forward to the information that you guys are going to provide to us so that we can have a comprehensive program that'll meet the needs of our community. And I really thank you for being here today under the circumstances, and look forward to continuing to get the information.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know through either Patty or Gloria or Mimi. We'll be happy to address any other questions that you may have. And we also invite you to share information about the website and the public engagement meeting with your constituents as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Whitaker.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Mitchell.
One other question.
Ms. Mitchell, before you wrap it up, this will be the second study that MGT shall have done for Portsmouth. Your previous recommendations, and I'm sharing this because we voiced it in our committee meeting. I want to make sure it's voiced publicly. The previous recommendations, because it was the first, those previous recommendations were more race neutral. We cannot continue, if we're going to make a serious dent and attack on these disparities, of just continuing along a race neutral line. And now that we have had data from a previous study, if these conditions continue to surface in this next study, then we would need to move towards some more race-conscious remedies. And we didn't pay you all that money to continue along the status quo. And so I just want to express that publicly, that if we see those same trends, that would move us along the line of more race-conscious remedies.
And so I will address that by saying that we absolutely have to wait to see what the data says. And in the 2015 study, we did recommend establishing an MWBE program, but we also recommended establishing a race and gender neutral component of that as well. And so we definitely will go where the data takes us. And given that some of the recommendations that we made last time, they may still be relevant this time, which we really just have to see. But I do hear you that it's definitely a desire to try to move the needle with your minority and women-owned firms in your marketplace. And there are a couple ways that we can do that, but we really just have to follow the data.
I agree.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, once again for your time and all of your efforts. We look forward to the continued follow-up.
Thank you.
And enjoy your day,
ma'am. Have a great evening.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Members of council, you will move into the council chamber.
I want to take a moment real quick to welcome all of our citizens to a continuation of our public work session. And right now, I will turn over the meeting to the city manager for our next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our next presentation will be by Ms. Nika Santos, who is a student fellow from the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative Program. Ms. Santos will be providing information relative to crime youth in our community. Thank you, Ms. Santos.
Welcome, Ms. Santos.
Thank you. Mayor Glover, members of City Council, and citizens of Portsmouth. I'm Nika Santos. Thank you for introduction, Ms. Chapman. I have spent the past 10 weeks here in Portsmouth researching, speaking with its citizens, and understanding its strengths and opportunities to assist the city in reducing youth gun violence through a whole community approach. I graduated from Harvard University last May with a Master of Education degree in Leadership and Organizations. And right now, I'm a summer fellow here through the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative. The objectives of my fellowship were the following. I'm not going to read everything to you, but I've put the key words in bold for your convenience. The draft of the outcomes for objectives 1 through 5 will be presented this evening. And I'd like to highlight number 6 because I have come here to support the efforts of the city, especially the core team, on the Bloomberg Harvard Innovation Track. I'd like to invite members of the core team to stand to be recognized, please. Thank you. This team, which is comprised of 14 dedicated individuals, have been meeting weekly since January to design solutions to Portsmouth's youth gun violence problem. This evening, I will be presenting in 4 parts. The first is an overview of the situation of youth gun violence in the city. Second part gives an overview of the public health approach that I am proposing to addressing violence. Part 3 describes the progress that this team and I have made so far. And part 4 is a suggested way forward so that we can nip violence in the bud. So let's first understand what the issue is. To get a deeper understanding of the issue, I analyzed a data set provided by the police department's crime analysis unit, including incidents involving youth offenders ages 25 and below from the period January 2017 until June 26, 2022. I have especially focused on violent offenses, which for the purposes of this study are limited to aggravated assault, weapon law violations, and homicide. As you can see on the line graph here, in general, youth violent offenses have remained pretty constant in volume since 2017 to 2021. There have been small fluctuations up and down, but on average, it's remained the same. And if we look at weapon law violations by youth, it seems to be decreasing. So there was a peak in 2018. It has steadily been reducing since that time. This can be explained by a number of factors. It could be by the decreasing police force or a change in behavior pertaining to guns. However, harm has been increasing. You see that there is a 27% increase in youth aggravated assaults from 2019 to 2020. And if we look only at aggravated assaults involving a firearm, the increase is 59%. Homicides, too, have been increasing, and overall, gun homicides increased 87% between 2019 to 2020. Other numbers that stood out to me while conducting my research are the following. I saw that 53% of aggravated assaults involved a firearm, and 91% of homicides involved a firearm. This is much steeper compared to the national average of 75%. I also saw that there were 37 youth-committed homicides since 2017, 42 youth killed since that time, and of those 42, 60% were killed by fellow youth. And just to clarify, by youth, for the purpose of the study, I've defined it as 25 years old and below. I also saw that there were 101 youth-on-youth aggravated assaults, and I included here. The number in itself is alarming, but each one of those could have been a homicide if things had taken a more violent turn. And while the situation appears dire, I believe that Portsmouth can effectively tackle the issue by knowing who is most impacted, where it is happening, when it is happening, and planning accordingly based on that knowledge. So let's try to understand who these youth are. The average age for a youth offender is 20 years old, and the average aggravated assault victim is age 19. If we look at this from the lifespan of an individual, this would be about the time that someone is entering the workforce after graduating from high school, making plans in life. And so from an intervention planning perspective, that looks like we have all of the schooling years to intervene. However, I'd like to point out this set of numbers, where 11 was the youngest aggravated assault offender in Portsmouth, 12 is the youngest firearm offender, and 13 is the youngest homicide offender. To me, this tells a story of how behavior changes over the time of a school-aged child. Maybe by 11, they are learning ways to cause harm to one another. At 12, they're gaining access to firearms and other weapons. And at 13, the worst case scenario can happen. We can also see an opportunity here to target youth at an age that is focused on prevention, right? So if this is the age when the youngest offenders are, beginning this violent behavior, then we need to be meeting this youth or addressing their needs before middle school, as early as elementary school, and perhaps even earlier in kindergarten in the early grades. 11 to 13 is a developmentally critical age. I myself taught 12 to 13 years old high school boys in the Philippines. And this is truly the age where they are creating an identity for themselves apart from their families. Friends are becoming more important. Being cool is sort of their primary concern. And so if we are able to teach them skills about how to create this strong sense of identity that is independent from external influences or make better decisions, and that's a great opportunity that we have. Another alarming figure is that the youngest youth-on-youth murder victim was only 3 years old, and this is just in the past 5 years. This is not an isolated case. There were several incidents of this happening, and this is a reminder of what is at stake. What's at stake? The youngest members of this city and the future of Portsmouth. And so I hope this drives home the urgency of the matter. This information, I believe, answers the question, when should we intervene? And when is it too late? And I argue that we need to intervene during elementary school at the latest. Aside from their ages, I want to point out that 62% of assault victims are male, and 12 times more African Americans are gunshot victims than Caucasians. Why do I focus on victims here? Because I want to shift focus away from criminality and towards vulnerability. We see that offenders are victims themselves, and victims can themselves become offenders too. And so when we're helping the victims, we're also helping those who may potentially become offenders. They're two sides of the same coin. With this understanding of who, let's turn to where. Zip code 23704 has the highest proportion of youth homicides, aggravated assaults, and domestic assaults. Meanwhile, I guess the second most violent area we could say is zip code 23702, which has the highest proportion of abuse and neglect victims and accidental injury due to firearms. There are different natures of the injuries here. And the next question might be, what makes these areas different? Well, we know that there's a high correlation between violence, youth violence, and poverty. The U.S. Census Bureau data shows that 23704 has the lowest mean income among all zip code tabulation areas in Portsmouth. They have the highest percentage of minors under a grandparent's care, which means parents are either not present or at work, need to work, and are not in a position to care for their children themselves. It also has the highest unemployment rate of about nearly 8%, might be 7.5%. They have the highest percentage of government workers, and I point that out here because I think that means you all and the people in this room can reach these workers. You're in a position to reach these workers directly. This area also has the highest percentage of unmarried mothers, and I put the percentage here, 65.6%, because it is much higher than the next highest. So the second one, which is zip code 23702, has a percentage of 37.6. It's a huge disparity. And again, an opportunity to meet unmarried mothers where they are. And finally, I think it's worth noting that they have the highest percentage of kindergarten enrollment. And so we can reach the youngest members of the city just in this area. We can look even more granularly at the neighborhood level. And we can think of the top neighborhoods for youth violent crime in two different ways. The first is the list on the left, which is based on youth crime density. And that just means how many youth offenses are there per youth resident. To me, this answers the question, where do the youth who need the most help live? So we're thinking more about the population of youth here. In the second list, we have the top neighborhoods for violent crime based on the raw number of incidents. So to me, that just answers where is there a lot of violence, period, not relative to the youth population. And I think this information is especially valuable and actionable because studies have shown that just 4% of blocks account for 50% of crime in many cities. And it directly relates to our city manager's Rock the Block program. And because my background is in education, I had to look at schools, and I saw that the top locations for youth weapon law violations are these 5 schools. Locations meaning out of all locations. These 5 schools are also the top schools for, top schools for youth crime. And this led me to look more into what's happening at Portsmouth Public Schools. I found that on average, 15 out of 100 Portsmouth students are absent from school. In other words, only 85% of Portsmouth's youth are in school at any given time. These are also the top 5 schools for chronic absenteeism. These figures are alarming because if we look at the top school, IC Norcom, which has a 31% absenteeism rate. That means only about 2/3 of its students are present. Now that we see where it happens, let's answer the question, when does it happen? Here we have lines representing how youth aggravated assaults increase and decrease throughout the year from January to December. You may notice that in 2017 and 2018, those are the red and blue lines respectively, the trend is relatively flat. There's not huge fluctuations throughout the year, and in fact, there's a noticeable dip in June, just about the time that kids are getting out of school. That's what most researchers would point to, it's trends in schooling. But we noticed that from 2019 onwards, there's a change in that trend where youth assaults rise up to May and June and then later decline. That pattern is repeated in 2021. I don't have very convincing answers for why this might be the case, but it tells us that there is a need to be more deliberate in how we address youth assaults during this period. This next graph shows how youth assaults involving a firearm fluctuate. We see a similar pattern, but what's worth pointing out here is the distance between the 2019 and 2021 lines. There's a huge increase in assaults involving a firearm in 2021, and that brings our attention to the urgency of addressing the access to firearm issue. So with a better understanding now of the nature of youth gun violence in Portsmouth, we can plan an approach to addressing it. And I've taken the lead from the city's core team, the individuals whom I've asked to stand earlier. As I've taken the lead from them, I propose a public health approach, because this is sort of what they've already been doing over the past year. Why public health? People don't usually think of health when they think of violence, but public health is not solely concerned with medical concerns, but with safety and well-being overall. It's interested in the maximum benefit for the largest number of people, and it recognizes that violence is communicable, meaning that people exposed to violence are more likely themselves to become violent. It also emphasizes collective and collaborative action, which I believe this city could greatly benefit from. So this approach comprises 4 steps. Step 1 is to define and monitor the problem, and step 2 is to identify risk and protective factors. These 2 steps have been completed up to this point. Step 3, develop and test prevention strategies, is ongoing and will go on until about October. And for the rest of the year, the team will engage in step 4, which is to assure widespread adoption. Allow me to discuss what we found for step 1. How do we define youth gun violence? It's pretty simple in itself to understand, but it's a beast to take on solutions-wise. And so the team has broken it down into its root causes, which appear to occur in a cycle. The first root cause is that youth's needs are not being met. I emphasized ages 11 to 13 earlier, and the needs of this age group are positive adult relationships, sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a desire for success. This is what they're looking for at this early stage. But because these needs are not being met, they turn to gang membership. And by any other name, they are undeniably present in the city. We can call them social groups, whatever. There are many names for what we may colloquially know as gangs. They fill the need particularly for belonging and safety, which may seem paradoxical, but when you're surrounded by peers who protect each other using their particular means, that is what safety is for these youth. And because gangs are around, families live in fear and insecurity. They cannot live fully while they are on defense, always ready for a fight or flight response. Because of this, parents don't allow their children to participate in programs that might fulfill their needs. And so I will show later that there are many programs in Portsmouth, but attendance and participation may be low because parents aren't comfortable letting their kids out to go to these events. And so the cycle goes on. Understanding this problem, we can now identify factors that contribute to it. On the left, you see risk factors, which are characteristics that increase the likelihood of a person becoming a victim or a perpetrator of violence. And on the right are protective factors, which decrease that likelihood. I'll allow you to scan it on your own. I won't read it out to you. But I do want to point out the themes that we can notice here. One theme is relationships, and another is skill building. One's social environment and ability to navigate through problems are strong predictors for their involvement in violence. And so any interventions and programs that we put forward and design must address these factors. Taking steps 1 and 2 together, I've come up with this theory of change, which answers how will Portsmouth experience a reduction in youth gun violence? Well, if Portsmouth youth experience positive peer, family, and community relations and learn positive social behaviors, then they will engage in less violence and more productive activities, reducing overall youth violence. We sort of know this by instinct, but I think the data helps us to understand why it's necessary and how it will work. So what has happened so far in step 3? Well, the core team began this process of developing strategies at the community ideation session held on July 25 at Behavioral Health Services. And I know that several people who attended are in this room right now. At this session with about 30 attendees, citizens came up with innovative solutions on how to tackle youth violence. So I'd like to contribute to this ongoing work by providing a map of the current initiatives in Portsmouth and suggesting ways to maximize existing programming while accommodating new innovations. So there are many different initiatives and programs, and they can be analyzed using this Hadon matrix. The Hadon matrix is a public health action framework that helps us to have a more balanced set of interventions to plan for. I'll quickly describe how it works. On one axis or one dimension, you have you can categorize programs based on their timing relative to an act of violence. So it can be before, during, or after. And the other dimension categorizes based on the parts of the problem that we can address. So we can support youth, we can reduce weapons, we can improve their physical environment as well as their social environment. We can further categorize programs based on the intended population. So interventions can be designed for whole populations of youth. They can be designed for specific groups that we've identified to be at risk, for example, chronically absent students. And we can also design for individual persons with high risk. So these may be people, youth who have already been in conflict with the law in the past, individuals whom guidance counselors have identified need extra help. We can also categorize by the intervention site or where the intervention will happen, at hospitals, in schools, in communities, when in contact with law enforcement, and this is my contribution to this framework, also in social media, because an increasing concern of the police is that there are interactions happening on the internet that we can't observe in the open but are definitely taking place. So as I've surveyed all the current initiatives in Portsmouth, I've met with people from all these departments and partners. I've learned that there are a lot of projects that address the risk and protective factors for youth violence, and I have categorized them based on the different frameworks I discussed earlier. So this visual summarizes what I've found so far, and I'd like to demonstrate what I'm doing for my remaining week here in the city. So just to demonstrate how it works, if you look at the number 12 in the top right-hand corner, that number represents the 12 programs that currently exist in Portsmouth that improve the social environment for all youth before violence happens. So what I'm doing next, for the next week, along with the team, is to notice things about this map and then make recommendations based on what I've noticed. For example, that number 8 in the top right-hand corner are 8 programs that support all youth before violence happens, and several of them are youth camps, maybe 3 or 4 different youth camps. And one recommendation I might make is maybe we can merge these programs so that we have a bigger population of youth to work with. There'll be greater diversity in this program, and the sharing of resources would be more efficient. Another thing I noticed is that there are no programs, at least based on the people I've spoken with. There very well may be more. Not enough time to speak with every single person. But if there truly is nothing filling this space, I think there should be ways for us to support individual youth before they engage in violence or before they become victims of violence. I also see that there are currently no programs to help the more general population of youth immediately after violence happens. And why is this important? Because witnesses are also victims and are also affected by violence that happens around them. And so when we only address the needs of those who are directly affected, those who are only victims or only offenders, then we're missing on that opportunity to create a healthier environment for all youth. So I will continue this process of noticing and then making recommendations. And all of this will be presented in my final report, which I'm currently preparing. So to fill the gaps in the map, the places where you see question marks or gaps that are represented maybe by weaknesses in programs or lack of resources, the core team will draw from the community's ideas, the ones that were shared during the ideation session, and I will also be recommending evidence-based programs. These evidence-based programs may come from other success stories in the USA. So Boston, for example, Boston, which is sort of the poster child of success in gun violence reduction. You may have heard of the Boston Miracle, which is a success story from the 90s. They had an extremely comprehensive response to their gang violence issue. Minneapolis, for example, experienced great success in the past with this astounding number of 62% decrease in youth gunshot victims. And Salinas and San Jose, California, are continuing their success even in the post-COVID era, which I think is extremely difficult to do, and there's a lot that we can learn from their practices. And San Jose also has a similar program to Rock the Block, and I think there's an opportunity there to learn from their practice. But we don't need to look far. We can also learn so much from within Virginia and from our neighbors here in Hampton Roads. This table shows that Portsmouth experienced an 87% increase in gun homicides between 2019 and 2020. Meanwhile, Roanoke did not experience the same increase. It remained steady, which in the grand scheme of things, because nationally there was a 33% increase. So this is a success, 0% movement. And Virginia Beach, I point out Roanoke, even though they're in West Virginia, because of a similar sized population, about 100,000. And their violence is also linked to the presence of gangs in their city. And I mentioned Virginia Beach because they are so close. In fact, I'd like to take a moment to recognize my grandmother who lives in Virginia Beach and with whom I've been staying. It's in the audience right now. So it takes me 15 minutes to get from her home here to here. And so I think there's a lot we can learn from their 59% decrease in gun homicides. All right, so once Portsmouth has determined what programs it will test, it must do the work to assure widespread adoption of these programs. And that's the tricky part, the sustainability part. So I have a long list of recommendations, but here's just a sampling that I plan to submit to the city and that I hope will help Portsmouth to sustain its efforts. So first, I would recommend forming a Future of Portsmouth task force comprised of partners from both public and private sectors. I was really attracted to this project and to the city because it set forth its challenge as a whole community approach. And I really believe in that saying that it takes a village to raise a child. So I hope that we'll take that to heart and form a core team dedicated to this movement. I will recommend to use and reallocate resources creatively. I've already discussed ways that we can do that in the earlier slide with the green, yellow, and red boxes. I think there are many opportunities for more efficient programming and sharing of resources. I also believe in the power of partnerships. To create new partnerships means to partner with national and state organizations, and to strengthen existing ones means we need to engage those who are closest to the issue. And in this case, I would recommend strengthening the partnership with Portsmouth Public Schools, the Virginia Health Department, and the grassroots organizations who are doing amazing work. I will also recommend to enact a marketing communication strategy. The engagement I've experienced in the past 9.5 weeks that I've been here has been astounding, and I think we're building momentum towards great change. So I hope we will continue that engagement through more effective marketing communications. It also bears saying that we should invest in a range of solutions, both quick wins and longer-term innovations. This helps us to sustain commitment and keep up that energy that we have been investing in already. Another thing is to regularly measure and evaluate progress. The analysis I did earlier can be done by the Crime Analysis Unit, and I've been working closely with the Crime Analysis Unit with Mr. Tory Mount. I know they're very busy, but I also know they're extremely capable of doing the research I've done. Because that's the only way we can measure whether programs are working and ways that we can adjust. Like what are neighborhoods that are experiencing decrease, what are schools that are enjoying better attendance. We need to keep track of that. And finally, and most importantly, I ask that you value your people. Listen to those who are most affected. So over the past 9.5 weeks, I've spent hours running data analytics and reading pages and pages and pages of literature, but listening and being accountable to my new friends here in Portsmouth is what has brought the most value to my research. So here are some quotes that I have gathered from my conversations. And these are only 3. There are very many more. So one thing I've heard, this is from Mr. Eugene Swinson. He says, when you tell a kid to stop what they're doing, their next question is, and then what? And what does this tell us? This tells us we need to provide more attractive options than the current options that are available to our youth. What are the opportunities and are they attractive? Are they better than what the status quo is? Something I heard from the city's SRO coordinator just last week is, and he works with kids all the time, he said, what you see is what you internalize. The youth needs help to redefine success. He understands that there's a need to improve the social and physical environment. If all Portsmouth youth see is what the status quo is, then that's all they're going to aspire to, and so we need to show them what's better and what can be possible. And finally, and this is not a single quote, I've cheated a little bit here, this is what I've heard from nearly everyone I've spoken with. They say that doing what we've always done is not enough. It is not working. And this is what they tell me when I ask, what are the barriers to improving things? They say, we're doing what we've always done. And so this is a call to you, Mayor, members of council, and the citizens of Portsmouth to act differently and to act now. I would love to hear from you all and anybody in the audience and who's viewing the recording. Please reach out. And if you would like, I have a feedback form that you are more than welcome to respond to. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from my colleagues on council? Well, one thing I want to say, Nika, it has been a pleasure working with you and the team. I know the core group is totally excited and a little bit depressed that you'll be leaving us soon, but I can't stress enough what the collaboration has done for motivating our leadership team and the citizens of Portsmouth that you have worked with to change the dynamic. And you're exactly right. If it is to be, it's up to me, right? So we have to work together collaboratively to bring the solutions that we desire, and I can assure you that our city is ready, capable, and able to do just that. So thank you. Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, Ms. Santos, is that your, yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
that's correct.
Thank you for the information. And you're presently a fellow or you completed?
I'm done next week.
Next week, okay.
Yeah.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
I have a theoretical
Sure.
question as far as your approach. You started out by saying that your approach was a public health approach. But then in your recommendation section just before that, you made a very interesting statement. I believe, yeah, your theory of change.
Mm-hmm.
You said if Portsmouth youth experience positive peer, family, and community relations and learn positive social behaviors, you said then they will engage in less violence and more productive activities, reducing overall youth.
Right.
That was overall youth violence. So that was your theory of change. And so you started out by addressing it from a public health theoretical perspective, but then is there any particular reason why you shifted to a personal responsibility type of argument?
I don't see it really as a personal, I mean, there is personal responsibility when, in the sense that all citizens need to be engaged in this. But when you say public health approach, it's really intersectoral. And so it's not only drawing from medicine, it's also drawing from education, sociology, policing, all those areas. And when I say that if Portsmouth youth experience, it's X, Y, and Z, it's not necessarily up to the individual to seek out those opportunities, but to design systems that provide those opportunities and design conducive systems for more healthy behavior.
And so from the public health perspective, and knowing that the public health is driven also by environmental conditions, so that if from a public health perspective, if you tell people to eat healthy, but yet there's a food desert and they're low income, then that public health approach is really overwritten by the issues of economics.
Right.
And so really what you have seen in 9 weeks is something that has occurred and transpired over hundreds of years.
Right.
What you see today just didn't pop up.
Oh, I agree.
Right, and what you're seeing is a lot of neglect, racism, disparities. So, for example, when you talk about the absenteeism in those schools, and you have to take into account communities that have high poverty levels, where you have some children who are staying home taking care of family members, you have situations that go beyond just making a decision to attend school or not.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
A lot of high homelessness, issues with students being very transient. And those are not individual choices. Those are conditions that arise out of socioeconomic conditions, particularly poverty. And so the approach to this, and even in your recommendation, starting at very young ages, you know, that approach takes years before you see, you know, the outcomes. And so it's going to take a significant shift in philosophy and how we view humanity to really make a difference and a dent in what we're seeing. I find it also interesting that from a public health perspective, COVID was not addressed. You see, because it was predicted that we would see these type of increases in crime simply because of opportunity and people being in the same proximity to each other so closely. And so that cannot be ignored as well. And when you see that these conditions existed before COVID, and COVID has only exacerbated them, then one should not be surprised at what we're seeing. And then on top of that, when we see the type of gun legislation, because we don't make guns here in Portsmouth, and so in any other areas you see it. And so I think I commend you. It's a very challenging topic. It's not something that is cut and clear, because until we truly address poverty and understand the implications of it and see the full humanity of everybody, you're going to continue to see what we're seeing. But I appreciate your
Right.
your
And I
presentation.
totally agree. And in fact, on the team, we have a representative from PRHA. And I've been engaging with the Economic Development Department as well to discuss what interventions they have to alleviate poverty and address it at the root, and not just, it's easy to say, hey, schools, bring your kids back into school. It's not that simple. There are many factors like you've discussed. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, but I do appreciate you approaching it from not just the normal criminal perspective, but from a public health, and that pushes us towards looking at some deeper issues. But it comes down again to where our priorities, funding, putting money into communities. There's still issues here in Portsmouth about where money should go for education. You see, so we still have a lot of work to do, and it's going to take some shifting of mentalities to get it done. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Santos, for the presentation and this great information. You mentioned the core group that have been identified, and thank them for being here today to be a witness to the final presentation of their work. But I know that this group is in place. Do they have any specific guidelines or steps that they're going to take and tackle first? I know that our city manager has, some initiatives that she's introducing as well. But how do we help support the core group? I know it's going to take that village of all of the council and all of the community and our churches and our civic leagues and all of that to come together. So where do we go from here when you leave next week?
Oh, yes. And I think the best person to answer your question is Chief Mangubad.
Okay.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, thank you. So the core team is comprised of just about every entity that involves youth and the health of our citizens. So we are monitored through the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, and all of this is through the application from our mayor. And everything is really supported to us through the philanthropies, so it really doesn't cost anything to the city except our energy to put this together. So where we are now is that since we met with the community, we want the citizens to help with us design the proper programs or mold the programs that are existing together so that we can have more efficiency with our outputs, within the population. So after October 31st is when you'll see the first deliverable, and these deliverables will come out as part of every aspect that we've addressed when it comes to whether it's poverty, homelessness, mental health, drug addiction, and so forth, along with the crime aspect. So the real idea now is that we have the foundation through Ms. Chapman's Rock the Block that is really getting us into using NECA's data. So now we're taking all of those programs and every effort within these small areas with Rock the Block and are able to, one, make that first strike of getting the momentum, and then two, the sustainability comes with continuous oversight because we're going to move to the next block and the next block. So you'll see a continuation of programs from here on out because we're now finally really organized. We have excellent data from Ms. Santos, and we have a core team that is committed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else down here that would like to ask a question? Dr. Whitaker, sure, you have the floor.
So Chief, what type of recommendations will be coming as far as policy-wise? Because if we don't change policies and put in place things that give people options other than what they presently have, then the choices will remain the same. And so I know what we're saying and trying to get everybody together, but still persons are living in conditions of poverty, low income, not getting living wages, poor housing. Those are the things that as a council that we have to address, pass policies at the state level as well. And so I don't want to try to give some impression, and I commend the manager. I think we have to get the community involved. But after that, they're still living in their community. They're still struggling to make ends meet, and that's where policy comes into place, and we have to come up with better means of changing the conditions that people live in, because there are certain zip codes that pointed out that and we know why. It's not like it's a secret. Right. We know what's going on. You see, and so I'm looking for more substantive things that will change the quality of life for people. And council, your assembly persons, General Assembly legislature, we have policy making authority to do those things, and that's what I'm looking for.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Whitaker. Yes, so really, to be able to answer what actual policies that we have that we want to put in place, I won't.
That you want council to put in place because it's going to take ordinances, right. And
yes.
It's going to require, when employers come in this city, are they paying living wages? You right. see, are we funding schools? You see, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes. So those recommendations will come. Like I said, we are working directly with the citizens to help co-design these programs. And with that, after October 31st is really when you'll see the true recommendations that we will have for council, which will likely, because we understand what poverty has led society to, where it's really survival out there. And you mentioning that the attendance level at the high school at IC Norcom being very high, and you're exactly right. If the parent has to work and there's no one there to take care of a sick child, it's going to be the adult or the older child to do that. My sister did that for me. She stayed out of Craddock High School for a whole year to help take care of me while my dad was out to sea because my younger sister was less than a year. We were right about 15 months apart. So it was one of those survival modes where the family, someone in the family had to step up. So we understand that those are going to be some serious issues because we have to provide that environment to reduce that mindset of we have to just survive day to day, to put in those programs that will do that. So we will, as the core team, will present some information via Ms. Chapman to make sure that these policies are enacted by you all.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for the beginning of the process. We appreciate your time. Thank you again, Ms. Santos, and thank you. Madam City Manager.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Santos, and the entire team for all your dedicated work to this project, and Ms. Santos, safe travels back home. Our next presentation will be by Ms. Mimi Terry, our Deputy City Manager, CFO, and she'll be presenting a recap of the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funding, as well as further discussions on the next steps for our ARPA spending plan.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, and Portsmouth family. This is the American Rescue Plan Act. What I would like to accomplish today is to first refamiliarize ourselves with the ARPA Rescue Plan Act. This was enacted in March of 2021. And the purpose of these ARPA funds was it intended to provide support to the state, local governments in responding to the economic and public health impacts of COVID-19. What are the eligible uses? Again, the eligible uses are COVID-19 public health emergency, negative impact, economic impacts, essential work performed during COVID-19, provisions for government, general revenue loss due to COVID-19 public health emergency, necessary and eligible EPA infrastructure and water sewer projects, broadband projects for underserved households and businesses, and the new category is affordable housing. The time frame for ARPA. Eligible costs need to be incurred by March 3rd, 2021, and that ends December 31st, 2024. Obligations need to be incurred by 2024, December 31st, 2024, and they must be expended by 2026, which means all funds must be exhausted by 2026. Unexpended and unobligated funds must be returned to the Treasury. The city received its first allocation of $28.4 million on June 24th, 2021. The second allocation of $28.4 by July 11th, 2022, which gave us $56.8 million rounded. The categories that were approved by council and proposed by City Council is citizen direct payments, homelessness, business support, broadband initiatives, public health and safety, infrastructure, water, sewer, community recreation programs, facilities. What we have here are the council-approved ARPA projects from the first allocation, which equal to $32 million. So these are already the projects that are underway, have already started, or have already been completed. The proposed projects for further discussion is why we are here tonight, to discuss and to receive direction from the City Council. For further discussion, we had the seawall replacement to replace the seawall at North Inlet, security fencing, Ebony Heights, to provide additional outfall for the western portion of Ebony Heights to reduce flooding, sidewalk replacement, elevated tanks rehab, Victory and Churchland, Prentice Place, That was a neighborhood revitalization plan, crime reduction strategies, recreational field house and field replacement, street lighting for neighborhood LED light conversion. Since we presented back in March, there have been some additional requests or some additional needs. The additional needs focus on public health and safety, which basically is the enhanced city security to reduce crime, gun detection software subscription and equipment, enhanced software to create a real-time crime data center, increased funding for LED lighting throughout the city. The 450 that we had, we need additional funding for that. Provide citizens with door cameras for additional security and crime deterrent. Facility upgrades and other modifications, some with the police station. Affordable housing, the contribution for PRHA grant for the second phase of the Lexington Place. Community block engagement activities, crime prevention, and reduction strategies. Where do we go from here? So basically, we're seeking direction from council to determine council's vision, evaluate the city's plan, a program, and project needs, prioritize the available funds for needed projects, identify the immediate needs of the city, which are allowable expenditures, assess the needs of the city. So that concludes my presentation, and I will take questions from council and direction from city manager.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Terry. How does the ARPA funding now, how does that correlate with the infrastructure as well as the $40 million that we have available for bond? How do these projects fit within all of those other contingent
Great
funding
question.
avenues?
So we have several projects already on the books for our CIP. And so with ARPA, let me back up. Not only do we have projects that need to continue to be complete, but we have projects with the new budget adoption that came aboard. So ARPA is basically going to assist us in resources. So we can either use ARPA dollars to fund some of those projects, because again, you've authorized but unfunded, which means we've authorized, council has authorized the projects. However, we're seeking funding. So your funding sources would be ARPA dollars, debt, which is our bond funding. So we can use bonds for what we're going after now, the utility projects. So some of the projects associated here could be earmarked for those utility projects under bond funding, or we can use city money.
So for example, which ones are under further discussion? Which one of those could possibly be infrastructure? Which could be the 40 million bond? Have we decided that yet, or what? Where are we on that?
Okay. So we have the bond funding that we're going for from utilities could cover the, I don't want to say seawall replacement, because I know that we have a bigger plan for downtown development, and the hope that we can have a developer address that. But that is an option.
And let me, so I don't get confused, the bond funding you're talking about is the utility bond funding.
Correct.
And how much is that available?
30, we're between 30 and 35 million.
30, okay, and then you have the general fund bond,
GO
which
bonds.
is the 40 million.
Right.
Okay, all right.
But we were doing utility bonds first,
Okay,
because it's just a big,
and so what you're saying is possibly some of the utility bond money can be used in place of the ARPA funding, so that we could shift this to possibly some other areas.
yes. The recommendation, as the city manager and I sat down and discussed this, what were the possibilities? We looked at the seawall replacement. We looked at some funding with Ebony Heights. We addressed, because we know we want the elevated tanks, because that is part of a CIP project, and we were looking for ARPA to fund that, so we wouldn't have to use bonds, but that's a possibility. Prentice Place could be part of the neighborhood revitalization because it does address water sewer. And if you look at any water sewer type of projects, those could be earmarked for ARPA. I'm sorry, for ARPA, and you can use utility bonds for that funding.
So are you going to give council some direction on the approach we should go with this, because there's several sources that are available?
Okay, so if it's the desire of council to ask me what direction we should go, I can definitely give you recommendations. But of course, I will look to council to give me the final guidance on what that should do. I also want to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but I'm sorry. I did want to make us, just because recreation field houses are here, recreation, the facility improvement, and the turf fields, I did want to address that as well, because during the budget, adoption of the budget process, council adopted the budget for $16 million to go into facility upgrades. That's with Norcom, Churchland, and Manor High School. That's the turf fields, the field houses. So again, those are the projects that council has approved. However, we need funding. So we have several options that we could go with that, but it is a part of your CIP already. We're just looking for the funding to cover that.
Right.
Mr. Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Terry, normally staff would come before council with recommendations, and we would take it from there with our input. I mean, are there any formal recommendations?
So,
and the reason why I say that, you're talking about using utility bonds for some of these projects, and you're in a much better position to know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Here we've got found money, if you may, from the federal government that won't exist probably again in our lifetimes. And so should we be using this instead of incurring debt? So those are the type of things that I would like to see staff recommend. What is your recommendation? That's why y'all are paid the big bucks. And I say that in a good sense of humor.
right. So I really appreciate that. And where we are now is I will take direction from the city manager. And if council's desire is to have the city manager direct me to do that, I would love to provide that information to you. How you would like that information is completely up to council, but I will definitely provide you with the recommendations of the funding, the projects, the funding sources, and how I would recommend we proceed so that we can make the best decisions and leverage our resources.
And that's great, but as I travel around the city, we've got a lot of infrastructure needs. You mentioned the water towers are just part of it, but that's a big visual part of it that I don't think should wait. In the past, we've had projects that required, I think, a 50% match, like the Twin Pines Road widening, the Hoffler Creek transportation corridor there. And you travel around our roads, some of them are deplorable condition that haven't been repaved or addressed in probably 50 or more years, quite frankly.
And yes, sir. And what I want to also just remind council that within the specific departments, we actually allocate dollars for certain projects. Again, we have a large portion that needs to be addressed by infrastructure, but we are also maintaining day to day. So one of the things I'm glad you did mention with the roads and highways and streets and potholes, I feel like I'm almost a pothole expert. So what we had to put a plan together to address those. So we're looking at the main highways, and then we're going out to the streets, the individual streets. So the same needs and that you all as council see, we see as citizens, as myself. I ride around and I look at these things and I make recommendations to the departments, and I'm constantly looking for dollars to fill those gaps. And I understand it's big. It didn't happen overnight. It is going to take time. But it's allowing me to look at the budget to determine what restrictions we have and what we can actually allocate or target for those things, whether it be within the first year with a small or short-term plan and then long-term. So we're definitely trying to address the needs of the city and still stay within our constraints to be able to do so.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Terry, for the presentation. And, I mean, with council looking at these things, these are conversations that we've had in the past, and from our meetings that some of us have gone to Virginia Municipal League, and, of course, me being a member on the Virginia First Cities, they're calling for cities, localities to effectively use their ARPA funds, and one of the primary sources that many of the other localities, suggested was that their water and sewer projects be primary. And then I know that the conversation came up with council members before that those cities don't have the problems that Portsmouth have, but just like, we know that we're not going to run up on this kind of funding ever again. So, I mean, we can already no-brainer go on and take out the things that we know that the utility bonds and that you said the general fund bond, that we would go after the 30 to 40 million, and then the other 40 million, go ahead and take care of any of our infrastructure needs that would be allocated for that. So, I don't know if we do that in a special meeting, or if we have it in a public work session, or, how we come up with that. But I think we already know what they are, but we would definitely take your suggestions just to make sure that we are on track with how they should be identified. And what kind of timeline do we have to receive the utility bond and put it into place?
Yes, we're moving forward with the utility bonds now, so you'll see it has to be advertised. We have a long list of things that are required by us, and so that should go out by the end of this month, no later than the end of September for that request. Also, I just wanted to make, under the direction of council, the additional needs. So while I'm actually creating what we could, or providing information and recommendations of what we could use for bond funding, these additional needs have come up. So I would like to add those for areas that can replace what we can get from bonds. But is there an area under the additional needs that you all do not want? And if I could get consensus to move forward on one or two of these items, I'm sure I can, knowing that we're going to have additional dollars, if that is okay with council. And I'll go through them so I can give you real, true explanations of what those are. So on the additional
If you
need,
go through them, then we'll open up the floor. I want you to complete what your thought is, and
Okay.
then we'll open the floor.
so for the one I really want to focus on is the affordable housing. PRHA received a grant which council approved $995,000 for Phase 2 of Lexington Place. And they had asked for an additional $1.2 million to cover the cost. Last, at the Phase 1, the city did contribute some additional dollars to Lexington Place because it was a match from the city to move forward, to allow them to finish their project. So my request tonight is if I can get consensus to provide PRHA with the $1.2 million of the Phase 2 for Lexington Place.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, my only concern with that is that PRHA receives funding from HUD, and we have not received any type of report indicating why this $1.2 million is needed if they're getting federal funding. Also, I have an issue with PRHA and this affordable housing project in that there's no minority participation within that master plan as was discussed at the previous council meeting. And just like in the past with some organizations that we had been funding, and you ask them for reports and we don't get them. And so before the 1.2, I think that there needs to be something more substantive. And also, why is it that the funding they already get from HUD as well as the monies they receive with the public housing dollars, why is there a 1.2 million need? And I would rather see that go to the residents than to just straight out PRHA, and it has not given us any type of reporting.
So under the direction of the city manager, would council's desire to have them come and provide that information, or would you like that in a report? Just so that you'll have the information you're in hand to make that determination.
I'm speaking as an individual.
Right. I think based on what you just described and the question that was before you, I think it would be beneficial for us to have that information provided to us, why they need the additional or additional $1.2 million, so that then we can, as a council, along with the city manager and the team, discuss, what we wish to do moving forward.
Okay, that's fair. So we'll, under the direction of the city manager, we'll have Mr. Ed Bland provide an update and provide that to council as a presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Community. I would like the consensus of council to address community. We have several community programs coming up, and we are actually engaged in community block engagement activities, crime prevention, reduction strategies. We would like to increase the we have a 1.6 that's up for further discussion, but I am just asking if at least $1 million could be released so that we can start and continue with the work we're doing. It could be $1 million, it could be 500,000, but we're actually engaged in the communities. We're actually doing a lot of activities, and that requires some funding for the areas that are unable to provide those dollars to move forward.
Vice Mayor Barnes, you have the floor, sir.
Is that an additional 1 million to the 1.6?
So because council has not made a determination on the 1.6, we're just asking for some funds to get started. So the 1.6 is still up for further discussion, and those are the things that we'll come back on. And it may be in addition to, if the desire of council is to have a consensus to do the 1.6, this would be in addition to.
And the 1.6 was the one that actually went directly to the organizations that were handling, that were doing things in the community that affect the crime?
Well, the result of that was council did not make a final determination on how that was going to either go to grassroots organizations, whether it was going to go to some crime reduction strategies within the community, whether it was going to be addressed by strategies with the police department. The criteria was not all the way, had not been finalized. So when we come back with further discussion on what it is we want to do with bond funding, what it is in my recommendations, we can add that as a part of what the strategies would entail.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor, then Dr. Whitaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How you doing, Ms. Terry? With our police retention and essential personnel, I just want to see, I want to know exactly which one of these address compression pay and how we are allocating that to the years of service that's some of our public safety members. How is this addressing that?
Great question. So as far as police retention for public safety officers, that was addressed with the approved ARPA projects that has already occurred. We're still finalizing some anomalies, I should say, with public safety. However, the retention for police has already been addressed as far as what the ARPA projects we've used. For compression, that is coming out of our local regular general fund budget because those address salaries. This is a one-time opportunity for retention bonuses or, for police and public safety. And all of police and public safety, well, actually police, that was our target. So that has already been addressed. Where we are dealing with compression is salaries, and that's general fund money. That has already been approved. We've already budgeted for that, and that is underway. I think we're at 85% finalized. We had a few that we had to address, and those will be addressed with this next pay period.
Are we addressing all members of our public safety the same way? I've been hearing information that it's been a 4-year span, and some people are not happy about how it's being handled. So is there any more details you can give us on how you guys are addressing this?
Absolutely. So what we're doing with human resources started based on council's direction to address compression and to retain our public safety officers because, as we all know, they are a hot commodity, and other localities were offering additional resources to fill their vacant positions. So what we did was we did a plan for years of service in a position, and then we sat down with the police department to determine if there was anybody left. We asked the police chief and the staff for their recommendations. He has provided them. We've pretty much gone through this process over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So now we sat down with city manager, we sat down with the police chief to address those who had some additional concerns about pay. So we looked at them independently to determine what the concern or the issue was. Everybody is not going to be happy, but they will be addressed.
And this is an ongoing process? Are we still?
Yep. So to address compression and to address overall, we're looking at every department. In each department, we're looking at compression. We're looking at pay. We're looking at equity. And it's not an overnight process.
Understand.
But we wanted to address public safety first. Public safety is out there, but if something comes up in the meantime within one of the departments, we address it immediately. But public safety was a big lift. Again, they did receive retention bonuses. They did receive incentives. They did receive, if they live in the city, $1,500. The retention was $3,500. So it's been an ongoing move to make sure that we address that and keep our employees with the city.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Same thing with the $1 million for the community. Can we get more specific as to what that is to be used for? Not, you don't have to do it today, but that would be part of the information that we would get.
Yes.
And then the last thing I just want to bring up is the funds that are available and the recommendation that I think that has been expressed that we should get as a council coming from you being the expert in the area. So we know we have, you said between 30 to 35 million in utility bond.
Yes.
Okay, and we know that we have to stick with whatever the policy is, and you're gonna hold us to that.
Yes.
Right, so that's not an issue. The general fund, that's another 40 million, which we already know fits within our policy.
To come later, yes.
Right, okay, the ARPA, we know that's 24 million, okay? So we know we have about 99 million at our disposal for these projects. That doesn't even include any possible infrastructure money.
Correct.
Right. So, really those additional asks, they're not even really an issue with the amount that we have available, even within our policy. So I would hope that, Mayor, that the council would give a consensus for the city manager to direct our chief financial officer to come back with a recommendation on how to use these 4 funding sources to accomplish the different projects that we have before us. And that way we'll know that we're handling it in an efficient manner.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues?
I
We-
did have,
Mr. Battle, sir, go ahead. Mr. Battle, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. When we're dealing with the infrastructure, we have all these funding sources, and I'm kind of not at ease with the bond situation. Why are we not looking at the funding sources that were just approved by the federal government, the infrastructure funding? Why are we looking solely on the borrowing process and the funds that we got for the ARPA to deal with that, the infrastructure, when the federal government has just approved infrastructure funding for the nation? And when I ask, they say that, well, this is done through grants, like that's a block or roadblock to being successful in obtaining the funds that we need for our city. And why are we not saying, well, this area of the infrastructure needs to be done right away, and putting them in an order or sequence that we tackle the problem, rather than just saying, well, we'll do this, so we're doing that. Is that, are we taking the best approach to solving the needs of the infrastructure problems that we're having in the city? Yes, we could deal with the waterfront, that portion, but is that the greater need? We need a list of the need in a chronological order, dealing with, whether we need this done or before we can attack a problem, we have to know the problems. So I'm just used to an orderly, systematic approach to problems, and not a, and so I know, as Mr. Muda said, we need to cosmetically take care of the water towers. That's a need that we've been talking about for the last 3 or 4 years. But we have to put this in an order of approach. And again, these bond situations, we don't want to use the last bond that we can get in reference to our financial situation. We don't want to use that and put that in place. We don't know when we're going to have a hurricane or something like that we're going to need to use that for. These, the 35 and the 40 should be rainy day situations. They should be something that, okay, I'm going to take my last $100 and I'm going to spend it. No. You don't want to ever take the last bond where you are to the point that you can't read that rainy day, and again, and to get in a meeting with the limited amount of time and to say yes and no on different projects it's not the best way to do this. This is something where we need to sit down, go over, talk about, and then in a meeting make our decisions. But just to get, yes, I know we put this together, and this is what we wanted, but we still need to sit down and, take our time and make rational, wise decisions with this funding, whether it's the last, the first, beginning. We still need to do that.
And Councilman Battle, that was an excellent observation. What I wanted to say is, as far as the infrastructure bill, we have submitted an application. So we are hopeful that we receive that funding. So even if we receive that funding later, it would still allow us to do some additional projects. What I also wanted to point out to council is that we have a lot of competing priorities. I actually agree that we have many issues. We have an issue with our dams that we're having to deal with, and that's going to cost the city money. We're trying to leverage that by getting some grant funding. EPA, DEQ, they all recognize that we have a situation on our hands that is we're going to need some help. So we talked about competing priorities. We're looking for every possible dime that we can get in being able to fund these projects. I did want to mention to council that the projects that we have already been approved by either this council or the previous council. Some of these utility projects are projects we're just looking for we're looking for a funding source. Some, when you approve projects, you authorize us to go after bonds for those projects. And fortunately, this was an opportunity to fund some of those with one-time funding. What we'd like to do is definitely prioritize. I would love to bring that back under the direction of the city manager. And we can go through utility projects because, again, we had the incident or the situation where we had a failing infrastructure even with our pump and haul stations and what that cost us because of maintenance that was neglected. So where we thought we could actually fix 12 because of supply and demand, we could only fix 3. So we had to look at some alternative ways in getting that done. We reached out to our neighbors, the Navy, anybody who had supplies on hand. We're actually in a better place now. Mr. Underhill is the interim director for public utilities, and we're working together to address those. We have capital projects, young man who has been an employee for years who is addressing that. We are really working hard to address some of these programs, and as we continue to look for sources, we know that some still has to come from the general fund or money that we've dedicated for these CIP projects. I think that's an excellent observation, and so to be able to give that to you all in a way that you can make the decision and we can prioritize through the direction of the city manager, I would bring that back as well in September.
Mr. Moody, you have the floor, sir.
I'm not finished.
Okay, sir.
Oh.
Now, are we making, when we put in these grant applications, are we asking for funding that will take care of our projects in its entirety? And I say that because you're not going to get anything that you don't ask for. And we have an advantage because we have the oldest shipyard in the world here that belong to this country. And the federal government know that. Are we amplifying those facts in our grants?
Yes, sir.
That will help us to maximize whatever funds we can get. Are we maximizing to the state that yes, we're gonna have 24,000 folk in Port Norfolk working, and you're getting the funds from that, and you know that the infrastructure needs to be done. And are we using those elements to get the favor that we deserve as a city when we're applying for these grants? And above all, are we asking for the money? Not a little bit of money. I mean, what we need.
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, not only are we almost begging, but I hate to say that, but people understand our position as failing infrastructure in an old city. And so because, again, we have the dams that we have to address, we have been approached just as well as we've reached out and have submitted applications. They have come back and asked for some additional information so that to ensure that we are identified as a distressed city as it relates to our infrastructure. And so are we asking for the biggest or the max? Absolutely. Are we applying for every single possible thing? Absolutely. Between grants and low-income loans, but we just want to be careful of some of the resources that we reach out to because it still is included in our debt. So we just want to make sure that council understands anything that's out there that is attainable, we are requesting the maximum amount of money. And we are so out there now or have been identified as a city in need that we are actually getting requests and people are sending us stuff to make sure we are applying.
We're not a city with a cup and then the kind of need you're talking about. We're a city that's vitally important to this country, to the operations, the success, the safety, the security and well-being of this country. And we need to help them remember that, the federal and state localities. And I am very, very, very adamant about them knowing that this is not a point of begging. This is a point of you being able to ship your goods all over this country through this city. You having the shipyard that repair your military hardware. Your wind turbine is gonna be done for the first time here. They know these things, but we have to amplify them to the federal and the state governments. And not the maximum. My calculations with the $9 million that we got for infrastructure, that we should get $800 million easy.
Mr. Battle, sir, I understand your passion for the question, but we have to move on with the meeting. There are other speakers that need to say what they need to say and give them an opportunity as well. So with your permission, sir, I'm going to ask that we end that conversation.
Yes, we will, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Moody will have the last say, and then I will ask for the consensus that we talked about before. Mr. Moody, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Terry, thank you for the presentation. Obviously, it's been a catalyst for a lot of discussion. But getting back to the additional request, the $5.7 million, and I think my colleagues touched base on it under community, affordable housing, and even the public health and safety. We just need to know some details on where the money's going to be spent. Gun detection software, well, how's that going to manifest itself? And you know yourself, when you detect a gunshot, anybody can detect a gunshot, but what's going to be the response? Are we equipped to respond to that? If that response is an hour later, well, that's like last week's newspaper at that point. So we just, it's like when you go to the store, you walk in with $3.5 million, what are you going to spend it on? And we've got under this additional request, that's $5.7 million. So, and all these things are good, but what are the details behind it? And what are we buying for the money? And how's that going to improve life for our citizens and make them safer? So, and I think my colleagues touched base on it, but I think everything would fall into that category on that page. But thank you again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. So with that last question and comment, we will ask the city manager. I will ask my colleagues on council for a consensus to ask the city manager to move forward with her team to provide the recommendations that were outlined in the request. I would like to call for a, Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Just based on those 4 funding sources that we discussed.
Well, bring back the 4 funding sources, how they would apply to what we desire to do as a council, and then we'll have that discussion. So, yes. So can I have a show of council hands for the consensus to move forward in that direction and bring back the reports?
They'll come back with details.
With details.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The
Okay.
infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Utility general.
Madam Manager, I know there are a few items left, but we have gone over our allotted time, and we need to begin our council meeting. So if you would go through your items quickly, and then we will adjourn the meeting for a couple of minutes so that everyone can get together for the upcoming council meeting.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, just briefly, we were going to have another presentation, but due to time constraints, we are not able to have that. Is it the desire of council to have it after council meeting or come back at another time?
You could bring it back at another time,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you, sir. Okay, so for my CMR report, CMR number 22-157, the adoption of a resolution detailing the acquisition of 320 Quebec Street from the Portsmouth Redevelopment and Housing Authority. CMR 22-239, an ordinance to accept ARPA funding in the amount of $28,421,282 from the Coronavirus State and Local Recovery Funds Program for the purpose of funding localities due to the negative economic impact of COVID-19. Item 3, 22-240, CMR 22-240, an ordinance to accept a grant for FY 2023 in the amount of $471,984 from the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services for the purpose of funding school resource officers in all 3 high and middle schools. CMR 22-241, an ordinance to accept a grant for FY 2023 in the amount of $173,763 from the Office of the Executive Secretary of the Supreme Court of Virginia for the purpose of developing or providing intensive adult drug and alcohol treatment programs. CMR 22-242, an ordinance to accept a grant for FY 2023 in the amount of $23,067.40 from the Virginia 911 Services Board for the purpose of transitioning the ESI Net 911 services to improve the 911 system. And CMR 22-243, an adoption of a resolution agreeing to a master lease agreement with the Southside Network Authority to occupy Portsmouth's right-of-way to complete the regional ring. That concludes my report, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. And that concludes our public work session. This meeting is adjourned. We will begin the council meeting in 5 minutes. The council meeting in 5 minutes.